Today we're going to look at what some people in ancient history did when they were surrounded by people who couldn't stand them. And they had to decide what to do. Because thankfully, we're not the first people in the history of the world who has had to deal with this issue when we're stuck. And here's the thing. Maybe you're not just dealing with the idea of being surrounded by evil people. Maybe you're just realizing increasingly you're surrounded by evil. Do you ever get that sense? If you want that sense, sit down and watch or read the news for 10 minutes. And you will realize that we are increasingly surrounded by evil. And then you look at the leaders in our state and in our country and our world, and you're thinking, do they not see this evil? And then you look at some of the decisions they're making, you're like, they're proud of the evil. Some of them, they're propagating the evil, they're causing the evil, and it can be very disorienting. Anyone know what I'm talking about? So what do you do when you're in that ninth square? What do you do when you're surrounded by evil and evil people and you're in a mess? You can tap out, you can lash out, but I think there's a third option. And let's see what that is. If you would turn to our favorite story in March, the book of Esther. The book of Esther. Now, I'll give you a little background as we begin. Part 2 of this 4-part story. Part 1, you see that there is an orphaned immigrant Jewish girl who is raised by her cousin, and he becomes her adoptive daddy. And in that captured nation, she's a Jewish girl who's living in the Persian Empire in the capital city of Susa. So that would kind of be living like in DC, okay? And she's in the heart of the empire. And there in the heart of the empire, the king has this incident with his queen. He banishes her. He wants a new queen, so a few years later, he does this nationwide beauty contest. It's mandatory. If you're a beautiful young virgin, it's mandatory that you participate. Everyone who participates gives up their future, becomes part of his harem. Esther doesn't just participate, but she wins, shockingly. And next thing the king knows is he has a Jewish immigrant orphan, doesn't know that she's Jewish, as his queen. And so last week we kind of celebrated that idea of there's this fire lily idea. There's chaos, there's evil all around, but rising from the midst of the chaos and the smoldering ruins is one of God's kids. And now she's sitting next to the throne, crown on her head, and you're anticipating something cool to happen. Now, in this story of Esther, what we've already noticed is the name of God is mentioned how many times in the story? Never. Hence the title, Where is God? And the author of this story is using a literary tool, intentionally deleting the most important character of the story. So you have to find him by diving into the details. And the more you dive into the details, you're like, his fingerprints are all over everything, even though his name is mentioned not once. So then as you dive in more to the story, you realize that, okay, her adoptive dad, Mordecai, is now a very low-ranking government official in the capital city of Susa. And at the end of chapter 2 that we didn't cover last week, I just want to tell you what happens because we continue from there. You're going to find Mordecai overhearing, because he's kind of near the gate of the king's court, and he overhears an assassination attempt. Now, Xerxes wasn't the kind of king you would want as your king. We know him from the text from last week. He was an arrogant, drunken fool. If you heard of an assassination plot, you'd probably start praying that it worked. This is an evil king. And yet Mordecai hears about this plot, and he lets the king know. The king's life is saved, and that's how chapter 2 ends. So you're thinking, okay, cool. So the next part of the story is certainly going to be Mordecai getting some sort of promotion for saving the life of the king. And like any good story, there's a twist. That's not at all what happens. Chapter 3, verse 1. And it's page 410 in your chair Bible, which, if you'd like, take that home as our gift to you, or take it for a friend as our gift. But chapter 3, verse 1, it says, sometime later, King Xerxes promoted, and now you're expecting to read the name Mordecai because he just saved the king's life. But actually, it's not at all what happened. Sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman. Okay, who is this guy? Well, he's the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and he's promoted over all the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. Okay, so you're getting a little feel for the position he was just given was the position of number 2. Lest you think from what we learned last week that Esther is in the number 2 position, you'd be dead wrong. Haman is the number 2. He's the co-regent, the vice president, the assistant king, whatever you want to call him. And the author introduces him in a way that his early readers would have known instantly that this is not a good thing because he's an Agagite. And if you know the history of the Agagites, you know that they hate the Jews. And there is this battle that's been raging for many years historically between the Hatfields and the the Agagites and the Jews. They loathe each other. And there has been widespread massacring on both sides for many years. And so for Haman to rise to the position of number 2 in the empire controls 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. So the known world has pretty much been conquered by King Xerxes. And now his number 2 is someone who hates the people of God, loathes them. And for him, it's personal. Okay, the stage is set. Verse 2, all the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by, for so the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. You think that's a problem? Yeah, try to insult someone who's on a power trip and see how it goes, just for fun. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why are you disobeying the king's command? They're kind of flabbergasted. Like when Haman comes through town, everybody falls down on their face except for Mordecai. What are you doing? Why aren't you honoring the one the king honors? They spoke to him day after day. It looks like they're trying to save the guy's life. What are you doing? But still, he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. Eeh. Now, Mordecai had already told Esther, his adopted daughter, don't let anyone know you're Jewish. But word had leaked out that Mordecai was Jewish. And that's going to come back to haunt Mordecai, that his nationality is now known. So not only is he disrespecting the king's number 2, but he's the very nationality that Haman the Agagite loathed and hated. You can probably already feel the tension that's brewing. Verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. I mean, he is going nuclear here. So he had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. Okay, he brought a cannon to a knife fight. But he's almost using this as an excuse. Like, I now have leverage to wipe out my enemies. I now have a really good reason to get rid of God's people because one of them refuses to respect me. It's a public thing now. And so I'm going to use this and I'm going to make an example of him by wiping out his entire people. Now, here's what's interesting about that. Haman is just one of a long line of people who have tried to wipe out the Jewish race. In fact, thousands of years later, do you know who Israel is surrounded by? People who want to wipe them out. Look on a map, look on a globe and see if you can even find Israel. It is a tiny, tiny piece of land about the size of New Jersey. And they're surrounded by enemies who want nothing more than to wipe them off the face of the earth into the Mediterranean Sea. They have been a hated people. Now, think through this. If Haman is successful in wiping out the people of God, the Jewish race, he will be committing genocide, but what will he be succeeding in doing? Who is supposed to come from the line of God's people? There's a rescuer that's been promised. There's a Messiah. So if Haman is successful here, there's not only no more Jewish race, there's no more Messiah. There's no more Jesus to come. So the stakes couldn't be higher. Verse 7. So in the month of April, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, lots were cast in Haman's presence. The lots were called Purim. That'll be important in a couple weeks when we come back to that word, to determine the best day and month to take action. And the day selected was March 7th, nearly a year later. That's this time of year. Then Haman approached King Xerxes, and listen to how he weaves his web. There is a certain race of people scattered throughout all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Do you notice the accusation? These people do not assimilate. These people do not conform. These people do not toe the line. These people don't go along with what everybody else goes along with. Does this sound familiar? The people of God through history have been people who have refused to go along with the rest of the world. We're people, if you follow God, you are a person who swims upstream. And you feel it. It's exhausting, isn't it? And like is it salmon that swim upstream? And then they die after they lay their eggs? Right? Do you ever feel like, man, I just don't know if I can make it? Well, then be like a salmon, lay your eggs and die. No. But we live going upstream, and we feel the pressure of the current against us. And Haman's using this rather than to say, man, these people are strong people. These people are people of conviction. These people are people of purpose. These are people that, despite being conquered by the world's strongest empire, refuse to cave. I mean, you would think that would be something that would be a mark of honor, a mark of courage, and yet Haman uses it to demonize them. They're different, and they've kept themselves separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. My friends, you and I are increasingly getting to a point where we're going to have to disobey laws that conflict with God's law. And when that happens, let's just make sure we obey God in a spirit of humility and not arrogance. And let's just be willing to accept the consequences. So, it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it please the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed, and I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government administration to be deposited in the royal treasury. Now, when he says 10,000 sacks, that was a technical term, a financial term. That was 10,000 talents of silver, meaning it was 375 tons of silver. To put that in perspective, King Xerxes rules 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, and this is 70% of his annual revenue. So he's saying, you want a windfall, king? Let me destroy people that are just making your life difficult anyway, and I'll get you as a gift 70% of your annual income in one fell swoop. This offer was too good for the king to pass up. Now, if he was a good king, he would have said, this is genocide. But is Xerxes a good king? He's probably drunk in this conversation. He's drunk most of the book of Esther. And he responds this. The king agreed, confirming his decision by removing his signet ring. That was how a king would enact an executive order or a law. He removed his signet ring from his finger, and he gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. He had the king's ring. You ever seen Lord of the Rings? There's power in the ring, right? The king said, the money and the people are both yours to do with as you see fit. Oh my goodness. So not only did the king give him the ring and give him permission to wipe him out, but he tells him, what can you do with the plunder? Do whatever you want with it. What would that do to Haman if he just got 70% of the king's annual revenue in his own coffers? I mean, this is an evil man alongside an evil king that's about to sow incredible destruction on the empire. Okay, Check out what happens next. Verse 12. So on April 17th, the king's secretaries were summoned, and a decree was written exactly as Haman dictated. It was sent to the king's highest officers, the governors of the respective provinces, and the nobles of each province in their own scripts and languages. The decree was written in the name of King Xerxes. This wasn't written in the name of Haman. He had the authority and weight of the king. And it was sealed with the king's signet ring. People don't know this is coming necessarily from Haman. They know it's coming from King Xerxes. This is an official royal command. In the land of the Medes and the Persians, when the king passed a law, it was permanent. It was not able to be changed. And so there's something final about this decision. Verse 13, dispatches were sent by swift messengers into all the provinces of the empire, giving the order. Now, as these guys on horseback were riding into the provinces, people would have gathered at the town square to see, what's the new order? What's the new law? And it wasn't what anyone would have guessed. And here's the new law. All Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed. And it goes even further to make sure people understand this. Killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on a single day. March 7th, the bloodbath. This was scheduled to happen on March 7th of the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. Do you see how evil Haman is? He's like, hey, I know how to make this happen. I'm going to turn everyone in the empire against the Jews, neighbor against neighbor, and I'll sweeten the pot and give them an incentive. If your neighbor's Jewish and you knock them off on March 7th, you can have their home, you can have their land, you can have their stuff.